Hi, and welcome to the first of our April webinars for the NPS Connected Conservation webinar series. My name is Cass Bismeyer, and I'm in the Biological Resource Division for the National Park Service, and I'm one of the co-leads for our Connected Conservation Community of Practice. Our group is focused on land and seascape scale conservation and working with parks and programs to enable them to work beyond their boundaries to further protect our resources with the help of our neighbors and partners and other organizations that are on the borders of our parks and program areas. We're really excited to have our April month. One moment. Sorry about that. We're really excited about having our service-wide theme for the National Park Service is Connected Conservation for the month of April this year. And we are just so excited with a whole plethora of resources and activities for people to partake in. I'm going to just show my screen really quick here. You can see our nps.gov, our main site, features connected conservation right on our homepage, which again, our group is just really proud of and really excited about what we've put together. On our homepage here, you can learn all about what April is Connected Conservation Month about. So clicking here, you can follow these actions. You can learn about these daily spotlights where we're featuring different projects across the agency every day, as well as see additional spotlights as you scroll down here. We've also put together a calendar of actions that the public can take to be a part of our Connected Conservation Month, as well as an internal calendar. And so just to show you some of our internal resources, this is our NPS Connected Conservation Toolkit. You can see our service-wide message here, as well as some of our daily spotlights that we've featured on our site. When you click on here on our service-wide messaging, and I just want to navigate you to one resource here, you can see the 2 different calendars of actions. So we're encouraging people to commit to one action each day to learn more about this importance of working across our boundaries. With that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to our guest speakers. We're again just thrilled to have some folks from Cape Cod National Seashore join us. We are in the midst of our mini-series that's focused on seascape scale conservation, and we're really proud to have this one kick off our April month. So today we have Brian Carlstrom, who is the superintendent of Cape Cod National Seashore. We also have Lauren McKean, who is a park planner, and we have Richard Delaney, who is with the Coastal Partnership Program. So Katie, you should have the access to show your screen now. Beautiful, that looks great. Okay, guys. And folks, before we jump in, if you do have any questions, feel free to plug those into the chat throughout the presentation as well. Okay, thanks again. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Cass. And I'd really like to say thank you to Rich Delaney joining us from the Center for Coastal Studies. A longtime executive director, and we'll be hearing from him in a few minutes about how we do so much collaboratively together, both with the Center for Coastal Studies and so much of the intellectual brain power across the spectrum of science within the Cape Cod community and beyond. And we also have Lauren McKean joining us today, who is a longtime park planner at Cape Cod National Seashore. That's going to share a lot of what we've done as far as collaboration goes with our local communities, with the county government, and with National Labs as part of some pilot projects. And a huge thank you goes out to Katie, or Catherine Miles, who's helped pull this whole thing together. She's really the wizard behind the green curtain that made this slideshow possible. Next slide, Katie. And I think we'll get there in a moment. All right. So this is what we're going to be going through. And, you know, it's Cape Cod National Seashore by its very nature with how it was created was a new model within the National Park Service that was carved out of 6 communities that had already been in existence for a long time. It was very different in the early 60s for the Park Service to be considering creating a site on the seashore within communities that had existed for hundreds of years. But it's been done, it's proven to be a successful model for collaboration and conservation, and continues to be one to this day, and many other sites across the national park system have followed a similar model. Next slide, please. So the seashore is the ancestral homeland of the Wampanoag, people of the first flight, whose presence date back over 9,000 years and continues to this day. When Champlain was exploring the Cape Cod coastline, he noticed that in the Native American villages of the Wampanoag people all along the shorelines, and he depicted those along Nauset Marsh that you see here in the forefront. And they still have a very strong connection to the seashore. And we interpret the importance of this landscape with them, and we work very collaboratively with them in non-COVID years each and every June to do a celebration of their culture and their heritage. The seashore consists of 44,000 acres. We've got 28 beaches, and this goes towards the collaboration that we have. 6 of those are managed by the seashore, and 22 of those by the 6 towns. And we've got a lot of ecological diversity with many species of fish, amphibians, reptiles. And we've recently had the reemergence of 2 species that we'll get to in a little bit, with the white shark reestablishing its historic range, and also the gray seals, and largely in response to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, coming back in significant numbers. We also have cultural landscapes, 5 of them, 8 lighthouses, one of which was commissioned by George Washington, one of the first in the country, and 83 historic structures, and all that is enjoyed by over 4 million visitors a year, and, enjoying everything from paddle sports and water sports to bird watching, whale watching, hiking, and having a good time, and a lot of contemplation going on just out and about the seashore, and we've stayed open throughout the entire COVID pandemic experience. Next slide, please. So one of the projects we have going on that's been in development from a collaborative perspective over the course of the last decade is the Herring River Tidal Restoration Project. It's a significant project that's seeking to restore the Herring River, which is an impaired water quality resource that's as defined by the Water Quality Act. It's currently impaired for several different factors. Fecal coliform bacteria is one of them. There's also some heavy metals present from sulfuric acid leaching. It's taking place in an advanced rate. But what this project is going to do, and it's done across 5 different federal agencies, 3 different departments in collaboration with the state, is hopefully restore up to 1,100 acres. 800 of those are within Cape Cod National Seashore to a more natural state, so that the herring fishery can recover, so that the shellfish beds can recover. They're actually closed at this time, and to restore natural tidal exchange up of the Chequesset Neck Road. This is well along its way. It's already completed an EIS that has been signed off on since 2016. We're working through the permitting process with the Friends of Herring River at the lead of this highly collaborative effort. And we hope to actually see some construction starting on this in 2022 or 2023. Next slide, please. And we have a number of salt marshes and estuaries throughout the seashore that are of note that we monitor very closely. We were one of the pilot programs for the inventory and monitoring effort across the entire Park Service, and many of the techniques that are utilized for estuary monitoring were developed at Cape Cod National Seashore. We will watch these closely. We are at the crux of sea level rise and climate change, and we know that there's a lot of subsidence happening in conjunction with rising sea levels that are changing our salt marshes at rates we're not sure they're going to be able to sustain. A lot of work has been done on that for many, many times, for many, many years, and we keep that effort going ahead, so we'll be able to hopefully be able to stay ahead of the tide cycles a little bit so that we can keep those marshes viable as possible. Next slide, please. Shellfish management is something that most folks wouldn't be aware of at Cape Cod unless you heard about it, but the 6 towns have the right to maintain their shell fishery by the enabling legislation for the seashore. So we work closely with the shellfish constables for each town when they give out their grants to make sure they're doing it with all the best management practices they can. And some of these shell fisheries are some of the highest quality shell fisheries in the world. Wellfleet oysters are renowned throughout the country and the world. And part of that takes place right within Cape Cod National Seashore. So we work very closely to keep that shell fishery viable, sustainable, and done in a very responsible manner. Next slide, please. And shorebird protection is something we spend a lot of time doing on the seashore. Piping plovers have been endangered since 1986, and we monitor them very intensely from March through October. And the last few years, we've been very, very fortunate to have had successful breeding target goals with the overall population, with productivity rates exceeding the recovery marks, at least at the seashore, not across our entire range. But that's been very encouraging over the last couple of years, and we hope that that trend continues. Next slide, please. And I mentioned this, no talk on Cape Cod would be complete without talking about the white sharks a little bit. They've started to reestablish themselves within their historic native range, and a lot of monitoring goes on, and a lot of collaborative effort for public safety is occurring continuously around white sharks and gray seals. You can see the logos of a few of the organizations that we collaborate with continuously on white sharks and gray seals. Of course, the Center for Coastal Studies, the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, USGS, Salem University, and many others all have a role in helping us to better understand how the white sharks are interacting with the seal populations, all while 4 million people are trying to continue recreation patterns that were established long before the white sharks ever returned. We have a seal education team that goes out and talks about why the seals are hauling out where they are within the seashore. We have collaborative efforts with the Atlantic White Shark Conservancy and Center for Coastal Study, where at the main beach access points, they will come out and their interns and scientists will talk with visitors as they come onto the seashore. And our lifeguards spend a lot of their time answering questions about, next slide, please, white sharks, because each and every day, you can see down the left-hand corner of the slide, that purple shark flag is flying, and it has been flying since at least 2012. And that's what lets people know that sharks are present all the time on Cape Cod. And from this, from recent research, we know that they're spending a lot of time in the nearshore environment. We have shark smart principles that are all depicted on this ocean safety infographic that we display at the entrances to all of our beaches. We want to make people really clearly understand that sharks are there, they're at risk when they go in the water, to practice all the shark smart principles, but to always remember the thing that's most dangerous to them when they choose to enter the ocean are the currents and the nearshore breaks that our lifeguards respond to hunt and provide assistance to hundreds of visitors each year relative to those strong currents and shore breaks. And the science on this is going on continuously. For better understanding of the sharks, nearshore environment, how they're interacting with the seals and other prey species throughout the entire seashore and their extended range. Next slide, please. And we're doing this all in a very highly dynamic coastal environment that's losing on average 3 feet a year, and at times in one nor'easter event can take a lot more than that. Some spectacular events have taken away as much as 60 feet, and these shorelines can change at a moment's notice. We move lighthouses. We've done it twice within the seashore's history thus far. We moved an entire Coast Guard life-saving facility back in the late 70s to relocate it to a more stable, sustainable location. Something that we're very aware of, monitor very intensely, and will continue to do so in the future to better understand as sea level continues to rise and we're exposed to more and more and wave energy as gets over to the Georges Banks, hundreds of miles out to sea, and the seashore continues to be subjected to greater intensity from continual wave action and erosion and the storm events. Covered a lot of territory in a very short amount of time. I'm going to turn it over to Rich. He's going to continue at this breakneck pace for a little while, and then we're going to go forward with Lauren on talk about some planning and sustainable efforts we have in place. Next slide, please. Over to Rich.
Great, thank you very much, Brian, and greetings to all of our viewers across the country, across the world, wherever you are. It's great to join you. I would just say a quick word about the Center for Coastal Studies. We are an independent, nonprofit, as it says here, research and education institution. We've been around for 46 years, not quite as long as the national park's been established, but a good long record. I work with 40 staff people, who most of whom are year-round. I'm here in our office in our marine laboratory, which is about 15,000 square feet. We have 4 or 5 research vessels in the water almost year-round, and we're an applied research organization, and we're absolutely thrilled and proud to be adjacent to Cape Cod National Seashore and have a long-term record of partnership and collaboration with the seashore. So next slide, please, Katie. Just 3 distinguishing characteristics or features of the Center for Coastal Studies. We really do approach our work as much as possible with an ecosystem-based perspective. And here are 3 or 4 examples, several of which are within Cape Cod National Seashore. But we believe, and not a lot of research organizations do this, it's really important to look at all of the disciplines, the chemistry, the biology, the benthic organization, all together so we get a complete ecosystem understanding of the subject matter we're researching. And that, of course, leads to our second feature, which is really emphasize interdisciplinary studies among our scientists. And there are a few examples there. And then externally, we have a wide range of excellent scientists and expertise here, but we don't have it all. And so collaboration has been one of the pillars of the Center for Coastal Studies for a long time. You won't understand all those acronyms, but you can imagine what they mean. And right in the top of the list is our longest standing, deepest, richest partnership, and that's with Cape Cod National Seashore. Our geographic work is usually the Cape is the Gulf of Maine, but much of our research takes us to places all around the world, particularly as we do our cetacean, whale, and marine mammal research. We're finding ourselves as far afield as American Samoa. Next slide, please. So education is near and dear to my heart. I was years and decades ago now, a former interpretive ranger right here at Cape Cod National Seashore. And so we maintain that important role of outreach to the public. A couple examples of what we've done recently with a little pop-up tent, helping visitors to head of the Meadow Beach and a couple of the other beaches within the seashore understand better that interaction, that relationship, ecological relationship between seals, sharks, and the beach that they're about to see. We've had seal walks, right whale walks. In our naturalists, our education director, again, a former national park employee, but we team up with the seashore naturalists every summer to do the best we can in educating the 4.1 million visitors to the seashore. Next slide, please. I just want to do a quick overview. In particular, for those of you who haven't visited us, one of the wonderful aspects of Cape Cod National Seashore is the almost 40 miles of pretty much unimpacted by human activity coastline. You can see here the beautiful parabolic dunes on the far right-hand side of the screen, the wave patterns along the edge that Brian alluded to. It just makes a perfect scientific laboratory for our coastal geology nearshore studies program. So we're blessed with that natural laboratory right here in our backyard. Next slide, please. So one of the applied projects that we did is we teamed up with Lauren and the scientists at the seashore when a reoccurring problem happened at one particular beach in Provincetown called Herring Cove North, constructed back in the 50s or maybe even earlier, by the state of Massachusetts with a lot of asphalt right up to the beach. Wonderful for our visitors to park their cars and bring their coolers just a few feet to be on the beach, but not well placed in terms of ecological integrity. And over the years, time and time again, literally thousands of tons of asphalt were broken off and contributed as debris into the nearshore system. Finally, in addressing the last erosion problem, the seashore took a different approach. Under Brian and Lauren's leadership, they decided to practice what we've all been talking about in the face of climate change: retreat, restore the ecosystem's natural processes, and still be able to continue your recreational value. So I think I like to say about the 3 R's of this example. Herring Cove Beach, we retreated, we restored the natural protective aspects of the beach once it was fully backed with sand dunes and providing natural erosion protection. And the citizens and visitors to Cape Cod still have a wonderful place to visit. So you'll hear a little bit more about that from Lauren as we go through here. Next slide, please. The other thing we've done in conjunction and basically funded by the Cape Cod National Seashore is to do a very detailed benthic map using a very sophisticated seafloor mapping high resolution technology mounted on the front of that little vessel you see there in the middle of the screen. And we were able to, of course, identify habitat areas, shellfish areas, eelgrass beds, but also the type of benthic bottom. And this is not insignificant. The seashore's jurisdiction extends 1/4 mile off into the underneath the ocean. So it's a lot of acreage, and it needs to be understood, especially in light of climate changes and sea level rise that are and will be dramatically impacting this particular seashore. Next slide, please. And just looking before we look further ahead, I just want to go back to another wonderful, fascinating study that was done back in the 1880s. A coastal geologist working for the predecessor agency to the USGS, U.S. Geological Survey. I forget the name. I think it's called the Geodetic Department. But anyway, he was assigned. His name was Marinden, and he was assigned to actually do 229 transects from the very southern tip of what is now Cape Cod National Seashore all the way up around the north in Provincetown. And he did those studies basically with a Secchi disc and a line dropped in the water a few hundred feet off the shore. You can see those depicted in that map. Primitive by our standards today, but state of the art back then. He kept meticulous records. He detailed a whole set of studies and put them, and they ended up in the U.S. Library of Congress. I think untapped and unused for decades and decades until one of our founders at the Center for Coastal Studies, a guy named Dr. Graham Geis, discovered they were there, brought them back out, and replicated the exact transects over 120 years later. And now we have a database that shows changes, and that's where we get to some of the data like Brian mentioned, average erosion rate of 3 feet per year, and lots of other data. And one quick fun note, Marinden wrote a little preface to his stack of graphs and charts and data saying, I did my best to record all this data accurately. It's well organized. Here it is. I don't know if anyone will ever care or ever look at this in the future, but I did my best. And when Graham Geis discovered that little note, he said, wow, this is a pure scientist. I'm glad I can duplicate his study. So let's go to the next slide, please. Brian mentioned seal ecology. There was a time back in the 1950s when seals were viewed by local populations as a nuisance and a competitor with a local fisherman. And they actually put a bounty out for every seal that could be killed. And there's lots of stories about young people and guys killing a seal and bringing the snout of the dead seal into town hall as proof that they had killed a seal and got their 50 cents or their dollar remuneration, their bounty. That little public policy basically eliminated gray seal population here on the Cape all the way up until the 70s or 80s when they slowly started, when the Marine Mammal Protection Act protected them, and they started to slowly repopulate this area coming down from Grand Manan and Sable Island up off of Canada. So it's been not a new phenomenon like a lot of people who are concerned about overpopulation of seals and the fact that they attract sharks, but it's basically a reestablishing of the natural ecosystem that was here prior to us, prior to the seashore. But it's worth of studying, and our biologist named Lisa Setti has been doing population studies from the land, from the air, in conjunction with park scientists. So we're really trying to get a handle on the distribution of sharks, of seals, vis-a-vis the also increasing population of sharks. And that would be my next slide, please. Because of the sharks now presence in along our shore, we have again tried to do it as sort of an interdisciplinary approach. That seafloor mapping that I mentioned early in the outset is now very handy to understand the troughs that form in waves parallel to the beach, off our swimming beaches particularly. And that tends to be exactly where the sharks end up migrating. So now we have a very detailed nearshore database that connects the ecological relationship between sharks, seals, and the beaches and the habitat. And this is good information to go forward from there for the management. So I probably talked a little bit too long. I'm going to end up mine and be my presentation, but be happy to answer questions when we get to that point. Lauren, I think it goes over to you.
Hey, Lauren, I think you might be on mute.
Lauren, you're still on mute. You'll have to go in and unmute in that navigation panel.
Okay, am I unmuted now?
Yes, you sound good.
Unmuted by both of us, so I'm sorry about that. I'm Lauren McKean, park planner, and I've been here a few decades, and I'm going to walk you through some of the planning history up to what we are facing today. It's changed a bit over time. The seashore is very complex, as Brian noted, and it's comprised of 27,000 acres of upland and 17,000 acres of marine environments. When you think of the National Seashore, the park is inextricably linked to 600 private properties within our boundaries, town-owned public beaches in addition to our own, and extensive state ownership a quarter mile out to sea. In 1998, the park released its master plan titled Forging a Collaborative Future, and we continue to apply the framework of that plan to many cross-jurisdictional and land ownership situations. The master plan articulated goals and strategies, and in some cases, decision trees for recurring issues, such as responses to coastal processes. Next slide, please. The strategies provided advance notice to the public of the approaches to problem solving, such as the National Seashore's intent to let natural processes be unimpeded and less impacted by human-caused interferences. One of those human impacts is beach facilities. Beach facilities must inherently be sited close to the ocean, so a retreat, restore, and rebuild approach is employed here in consultation with the coastal scientists from within the National Park Service and also at the Center for Coastal Studies. Next slide, please. The Parks 2018 foundation document continued in a similar vein to the master plan because the decision-making tools have stood the test of time. However, we've amended our thinking due to the needs posed by increasing climate change and sea level rise, which were not as evident 2 decades ago, as I'm sure many of you share that same concern. We have episodic storm events that are becoming more frequent and powerful, and inundation of parking areas, such as what's depicted on this slide. We have a lot of concerns based on the escalating dynamic natural processes in play. Next slide, please. And for some, we call them hotspots. When you lose elaborate stairs for 4 out of 5 years and there's no alternative, you rebuild as we have done at Marconi Beach. The somewhat comforting measure of 3 feet a year of erosion over a 100-year history that Brian mentioned does not hold up when we have 45 feet of erosion loss in a 5-year period. Next slide, please. Another example of retreat and rebuild is the large-scale effort at Herring Cove Beach North. You saw the whole beach complex on Rich's slides, but this is the north section where costly realignment and resource protection measures were needed to adaptively manage park facilities. You can see some of the extensive quantities of work that had to be done. And in fact, when the construction was already underway, it was decided to move the facilities an additional 200 feet inland, as we were again coming too close to Cape Cod Bay. So that was a direct reminder to everyone involved to always be nimble during adaptation projects, and we were lucky to be able to suspend the construction project and then resume it once we had new plans drawn up, which was an additional costly endeavor. Next slide, please. Well, there was a climate adaptation workshop in 2018 that was hosted by Schoodic Institute at Acadia National Park. It brought a team of us together with several town conservation agents. In examining how to improve community awareness, we undertook this scenario planning exercise. It was really helpful to look at all of the aspects of issues that needed to be articulated to the public about readiness. We needed to have their awareness. We needed to have intergovernmental cooperation. We needed to have plans in place, guidance. The towns wanted to do more regulation. And then we needed also the ability to activate. So since then, the park and staff have been individually and collectively examining potential responses to the issues that we're facing so we can prepare our residents, visitors, and communities for the future. And we've been opportunistic about these advanced planning opportunities that have come our way, and I'm going to walk you through a few of those efforts. Next slide, please. For the park, the Washington Office of Sustainable Operations helped us to engage the Western Carolina University in examining effects of climate and sea level change and increasing storm surge vulnerability to our transportation and our structure, our transportation assets and our structures. And they've come up with a risk matrix that was helpful to us in examining what the dynamic changes are that may impact those resources. Next slide, please. The towns have been doing a similar type of analysis in their municipal vulnerability preparedness plans that have been funded by the Commonwealth. Currently, the National Seashore, with assistance from the Washington office again, became engaged with the Department of Energy National Renewable Energy Lab. And we're doing an operational resiliency study with them. The goal is to withstand, respond to, and recover rapidly from climate change disruptions. The study will be completed later this spring, and we'll be happy to share it. We'll probably be pretty proud of it. It's one of 3 pilot parks that have been engaged by Washington. Some models project that our sea level here will rise by 1 to 3 feet by 2050. This alone is reason for concern for us. But when more frequent severe storms take place on top of increased sea levels, the threat is amplified tremendously. We have now, through this study, illuminated the most important risks, hazards, vulnerabilities for public safety and asset protection. And we've developed a list of solutions based on increasing wind and for example, based on existing increasing wind and precipitation during storm events and the number of high heat days. One level of focus will be on operational mitigations, providing shelter, evacuations, and emergency readiness. Among other solutions is the importance of ensuring that there's potable water and fuel availability in dispersed park areas after storm events and not in one central location. Raising of low-lying roads and enlarging culverts, subject to increasing and repeated inundation, and improved communications infrastructure systems. Next slide, please. Finally, a very interesting work in progress is a study that NPS is not leading. The conservation agents of the 4 to 6 towns, 4 of the 6 seashore towns have engaged with Center for Coastal Studies and harbor and coastal zone managers on an intermunicipal shoreline management plan through a coastal zone management resiliency grant. And I think this initiative is based in part on the stimulating crosstown discussions that we had during the Schoodic Institute scenario planning sessions. The shoreline change and challenges on the bay present a different set of regional challenges than the ocean side. You're more likely to see coastal engineering structures and other interventions, and local conservation commissions have regulatory authority both inside and outside the seashore boundary. And the participants have compiled a consistent data set, very extensive, and they now desire to align regulatory guidance and requirements across the 4 towns, which is a really remarkable effort. It includes collective approaches to topics like responses to rock revetment proposals and beach nourishment calculations by landowners and their engineers. And also they're interested in coordinated approaches to things like sand banking for municipal beach nourishment projects. With the study's goal of proactive regional management of coastal resources through a science-based approach, this coordinated effort seemed like a fitting end to our presentation of Seascape collaborations. We are a participating stakeholder and we look forward to the outcomes by the end of the year, and we'll also share those as we can. So now I'd like to open up the opportunity for questions to the presenters. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Lauren and Brian and Richard, for this excellent presentation. We do have a few questions already in our Q&A here. Folks, if you haven't dropped a question in, you'll just go ahead and type it in and we'll read it aloud, and the appropriate presenter will answer that. So feel free to go ahead and just drop your questions in as you have them. Our first question is, I'm a TerraCorps AmeriCorps member serving in Barnstable and I'm quite familiar with the seashore and the Wampanoag, but I'm curious as to how Cod National Seashore is preserving cultural history currently.
I can field that one. Yeah, in terms of cultural history, with the 83 historic buildings and through a myriad of partnerships, we're doing quite a bit. We've also got 5 cultural landscapes. So I'll give one example that focuses on a partnership effort with Cape Cod Modern House Trust. They're preserving representative examples of structures that showcase the mid-century modern artistic movement. And that's something that the public can come out and stay in those through a collaborative effort with Cape Cod Modern House Trust. We also have a couple different relationships with municipalities to preserve structures. The Highland House, which was a historic hotel in the Highland Cultural Landscape District, is run by the Truro Historical Society, and that functions as their town museum as well. So they're preserving that building on the seashore's behalf, and it's serving a purpose for this town of Truro. And then the Nauset Light Preservation Society effectively manages Nauset Light for us in collaboration with us and helps to preserve it. This summer, they're going to be repainting it. We're doing that all through a collaborative construction effort. And we hope to be doing some more with Payamet in the near future at the Highland Center on cultural activities that are going on today and interpreting what's happening at the seashore through the performing arts and actually the circus arts. So there's a couple examples of how we're engaging with cultural resources and preserving them on the seashore. And we are hoping to have 4 members of the Wampanoag tribe from their youth community as interns at the seashore this summer, working on sharing science and interpretation. That's in the works right now, and trying to get all the COVID protocols lined up so we can do that as safely as possible. But we receive funding to do that this year. So that's a couple examples. I hope I covered enough.
Yeah, I think so, Brian. That was great. Second question already here. How do you define sustainable shell fishing? What thresholds or standards are used to determine what is sustainable? And this person was thinking about bycatch, shellfish population, etc.
The bycatch? Well, they're grants that are given by the town, and we work very closely so that all the gear and everything that they're using within the seashore, because it's the town that has the primary jurisdiction on these, is done in the most responsible environmentally responsible manner possible. And Lauren has a lot more experience with this over the years than I do. It's an absolutely critical piece of the town's managing those shellfish beds. And there's a lot of commercial operation going on, and there's actually wild shellfish bed harvesting taking place within the seashore. You got to keep, this is where the complexity of the seashore really comes in. Usually when you hear national parks and any kind of commercial extractive activities, it doesn't necessarily mesh. But the bottomlands, by and large, are still owned by the towns and the state, and they have jurisdiction over that. That's where the shellfish are being harvested from. And then they're removed through the water column at the seashore, and we work in close collaboration with the shellfish constables that have the primary jurisdiction on this to make sure any of the practices that they're doing is responsible to the seashore in terms of minimizing and removing derelict gear, making sure the beds that are being actively utilized are done so in a sustainable manner in terms of they're limiting the harvesting techniques in close collaboration with the shellfish constables. The shellfish constables want to keep these grants viable for as long as possible. The town and many people in the towns, their livelihoods are dependent on this. Lauren, if you have anything to add, please chime in.
I think one thing that I would just add is that the state also looks at parcels that are being suggested for shellfish aquaculture grants and make sure that it's an unproductive area for shellfish before people are allowed to introduce new material, new organisms to the substrate. So that's an important resource protection concern for us, the wild shell fishery.
Okay, let's move to the next one here. There's a comment saying that these were great presentations. Thank you so much. This person be curious to hear what the NPS may be doing to collaborate with other major protected areas outside our boundaries, including in particular Spellwagon Bank National Marine Sanctuary, Monomy National Wildlife Refuge, Massachusetts Audubon State Park, etc. Just thinking in, how does Cape Cod and its marine environment think as linked as one ecosystem? Are we doing?
Very much so. We're engaged we interpret Stellwagen Bank from the Providence Lands Visitor Center because we're the closest point on land to it. And we're working with Rich in the Center for Coastal Studies in the town of Provincetown at trying to develop a visitor information center in downtown Provincetown, right at the wharf, to further explain what Stellwagen Bank is about, why it's so important in maintaining the seascapes in Greater Cape Cod and Bay, Gulf of Maine as a whole. And for Monomoy National Wildlife Refuge, we are continually consulting with them and interacting with them on a number of topics. they've had experienced some very significant erosion events this past winter, to a point that long-standing National Weather Service high-altitude balloon launch station is being removed. So this isn't specific to Monomoy as a National Wildlife Refuge, but the National Weather Service has approached the seashore to see if there may be a location they could reestablish that weather monitoring balloon launch facility within the seashore, and there very well may be. But Monomoy, we had a set of, this is a very on the ground example, and it's not necessarily for conservation, but it's an example of how we're supporting them from a management perspective. They effectively lost a lot of their facilities, so we are loaning to them a set of restrooms that their staff can use. We're trying to help them find some housing for some of their seasonal employees. They're part of the Department of Interior family, and we're interacting with them continuously. They know a lot more about the seals. They have a greater population down there because it's a lot more remote. So we're continually interacting with them on a number of things, and also for some of their shorebird expertise. So it's one big happy family out here in the Cape.
And if I may just add, we at the center feel particularly blessed because here we are at the very tip of Cape Cod, 45 miles out into the ocean, a perfect spot from which to launch our marine research, including Stellwagen Bank, but also adjacent to the 44,000 square miles of Cape Cod National Seashore. So we get the best of both worlds, NOAA and the Department of Interior, Cape Cod National Seashore.
Got a couple more in the queue already. And folks, we have about 10 minutes left, so feel free to add some more questions in there. If we don't get to them, we'll send them on to the presenters and they can respond as appropriate to you directly. This question is, can you elaborate a bit more on the retreat and rebuild system that the National Park Service is using? Are all renovations evaluated through this lens? And what are some of the factors that park planners are looking at to decide whether to retreat or rebuild?
Lauren.
Well, I can't say that in all cases we will rebuild. We haven't come upon a structure that is historic, that is, you know, a very large building that needs to be moved or removed. We have had to demolish residences. The towns and the seashore have removed small ancillary structures related to the beaches. Our retreat and rebuild, we look at things like the velocity zone and how far inland it goes. Do we have an alternative that topographically we can take advantage of? In the case of Nauset Light Beach recently, in the last few years, we were having the same problem as Marconi Beach with the stairs. But topographically, we have the ability to put in a new pathway. It's a longer path down, but it's actually a little easier than a set of stairs with all your beach gear. So it's the application is to look at, you know, all of the resources, all of the opportunities and advantages for that particular site. Brian, anything else?
Yeah, and in addition to the coastal erosion, we also have going on simultaneously coastal accretion in some locations. And that's a very different scenario. We're needing to raise and rebuild in some instances where things are actually getting buried and inundated by sand. So we're dealing with it with the challenges of trying to sustain culturally significant features in a dynamic coastal environment where it's both coming at us and being removed from us. So it's retreat, rebuild, reconsider, evolve, adapt. It's a lot of different factors going on simultaneously, but it's all based in the science that we have in hand and trying to apply that to the solutions to sustain the access while preserving the resources. And we've got a lot of monitoring going on within the seashore, both within the estuaries, with long-term air quality monitoring going on as well. And it's, as management policies tells us, we're required to be informed by science in order to make our management decisions, and we practice that very intently.
If I could, yeah, I could add just a little bit about the science. We at the center are trying to provide some really fine-tuned scientific understanding of where the lowest, most vulnerable spots along the coastline are currently and will be as sea level rises and storm events happen. We call that project the Storm Tide Pathways. So we've been working with the seashore and the towns that are on the Cape Cod Bay side. It's more applicable there than the ocean side. And looking, combining, I won't go into the scientific data part of it, but we're able to actually pinpoint just a few feet along the coastline where it's not always obvious that that will be the first little channel or pathway through which major storm flooding will happen on a tide, on a certain tide. That allows the Park Service managers and the town managers, the DPW officials to better understand how to prepare, retreat, or even barricade if they have to in that area. So it's another good example of providing good science, up-to-date science for managers to solve problems as climate change dramatically changes our environment here in the Cape.
If I could ask a follow-up question, I think in that initial question, folks were asking if it's a NPS-wide approach to the retreat and rebuild. Is that, or is that something that you all have just kind of zoned in on and are using for your purposes there?
We're doing it very intently, and it's worked well in 3 different instances. Specifically Herring Cove, currently at Nauset Light Beach, and in the rebuild model with what we showcased at Marconi. But there are a number of similar applications of the same sort of techniques throughout the service. So I wouldn't say it's being applied systematically, but I think it is being considered in a number of locations all around the service where there's a high potential for erosion and a dynamic coastal environment. You know, probably the most notable example outside of Cape Cod is down at one of our sister seashore parks, Cape Hatteras, and they moved the entire Hatteras Light. That's a very high-profile example of this in action with an iconic cultural resource feature.
Yep. Speaking of the Herring River restoration, another question on that specifically about has it been funded, and if so, what are the next steps?
The entire project has not been funded to date. The entire bill for that is somewhere around $62 million. That's not all Park Service. There are 8 different infrastructure components to that, and the big piece of that is the Chequesset Neck Bridge, which will include integrated within it tide gates that will allow very gradual restoration of a natural tidal flow regime. The Park Service portion of that is $5 million. That has been approved by the Investment Review Board and is winding its way through the complex funding process. But it is alive and well. It has had a lot of visibility within the Park Service funding community, and we're pretty confident it will get funded one way or another. Just don't know the exact path yet.
Rich, question for you here. You had mentioned American Samoa, where the Park Service also has a site and where the center conducted science and stewardship work there. This question is, are there some observations that could be shared about their respective seascapes and work to foster stewardship in both settings?
The project I was referring to there is work we do with marine mammals and endangered species. I didn't talk a lot about it, but one of the major components of our research here is around the North Atlantic right whale, which is the most endangered large whale species in the country, or the world probably, and which inhabits Cape Cod Bay right now in the winter. Almost the entire population of 366 of them are here. But we also have a long-standing 40-year database on humpback whales. And our subspecies of humpback whale has similar characteristics to a subspecies that inhabits the waters around American Samoa. So that's the reason why our humpback scientists go back and forth on an annual basis to compare the 2 species. We do an awful lot of work. In fact, most people probably know the Center for Coastal Studies because of our whale and whale disentanglement work. We've pioneered 40 years ago the safe techniques for taking rope off of large entangled whales at sea, and train people in partnership with the International Whaling Commission, train teams of disentanglers or rescuers from around the world. Again, some of those in Southeast Asia and in the South Pacific Islands.
Great. A few more here, and then we can wrap it up. One question is specific to working with state partner species. This question is, salt marshes are getting more and more attention as sea level rise and storm surge in species like the salt marsh sparrow. Is the park working with the state with this species?
With the salt marsh sparrow specifically? Not that I'm familiar with. But we are doing a lot of monitoring of the salt marshes, and of course they are becoming more important. We've done a lot in collaboration with USGS and NOAA, Natural Resource Conservation Service, have all had a role in developing the baseline information for hydrologic studies, understanding the vegetation, what the restoration regimes would look like for the entire Herring River watershed. And a lot of advanced planning has gone into that so that when the funding does become available, we'll be ready to move right into the active work of restoring that very imperiled resource.
I would echo what Brian just said and say that we are concerned about the abilities for salt marshes to withstand the sea level rise associated with the need for the salt marsh to migrate upland, because people are putting in structures that will prevent that from occurring. We have some areas of great concern. And then we also have species that are contributing to vegetation losses. So maybe not the sparrow, but we're watching the crab herbivory of the salt marsh grasses.
Okay, we'll wrap it up with one question here. Great presentation, folks. Again, just lots and lots of comments about great presentation. Are there plans to redevelop or restore and reuse the former radar-based buildings where the Payomet Performing Center is currently located?
Holistically, no. Many of those structures are just too far gone and they're starting to literally fall in on themselves, and a lot of them contain hazardous materials. We've removed a number of them already, and we hope to remove many more of them very soon. We've actually got a containment fence around the entire base portion of it and secondary fencing around the buildings that are actively falling apart. You know, we would like to, when it's safe to do so, provide more interpretive opportunities. Payomet's very interested in doing that with us. They do want to restore one building to start, and maybe a few others in the future. We're not doing every structure at the Highland Center. About 20 structures there are going to remain standing. Of course, the primary control structure that is nuclear blast hardened, that's never going anywhere ever. At some point in time, it'll go over the edge. That'll be long after we're all gone, but that is a very substantial structure that will never be demoed. But Payomet has signed, and the regional director, Davidsky, has agreed that we're good to go with restoring the appropriate for Payomet, the Officers Club, through a construction partnership to lease agreement. And we hope to advance that within the very near future. And we actually do have a partnership workshop happening later this week that Rich will be involved in, so will Payomet, so will the Cape Cod Modern House Trust, so a number of our friends of Herring River, and about a dozen of our other partners, for the first time ever are going to be getting together to explore what we may be able to do with additional partner opportunities across the entire seashore. So much work going on in a collaborative manner. It's really exciting to be having that workshop happen, which was scheduled a year ago, then we had COVID, so we pivoted. We're doing it virtually just like this. But we really appreciated the opportunity to interact. Thank you so much, Rich. Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Katie. Thank you, Kaz. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out and just email us, and we'll respond as soon as we can.
Yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in, and thanks again to Brian, Lauren, and Rich for a great presentation. Folks, for our next webinar in our series, our mini series focused on seascape work across the agency, we are featuring marine mammal strandings and tribal relationships, and that's taking place on April 15th. So plan to tune into that if you can. I just dropped a link where you can register as well as catch all of our past recordings. And then our last webinar in our mini series focused on seascape work is on April 20th, and that is focused on marine Washington Maritime National Heritage Area. So all the way on the other coast with some folks who are working to preserve the coastline there. So in the state of Washington. So thanks again for tuning in. Really appreciate your time and attention, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everybody.